shooting, we'll talk about trigger control. So controlling your trigger, yes, you're doing it physically, but it's a mental process in order to do it correctly. Using your finger to pull the trigger, there's not that much to it, but you have to do it correctly, and that's a mental process. Good trigger control results when the trigger finger pulls the trigger straight back with increasing yet constant and steady pressure until the firearm discharges without disturbing your sights or sight alignment. So anybody who's been in the military knows that when you talk about trigger control, it's skillful manipulation of the trigger causing the weapon to fire without disturbing the sight picture or sight alignment. Basically is the definition we used to get. So trigger control is also the most difficult handgun fundamental to master. But once you get it mastered, even guys who are like IPSC shooters or competition shooters that shoot all the time, tens of thousands of rounds, they still make a mistake every once in a while. So you have to really focus, and it's a mental process to get it done. Doesn't take that much to pull a trigger, but to do it correctly, it's a mental process. So when you're using good trigger control, triggers between the fingertip and the first joint of your index finger. So basically you got the end of your finger here, you got that first joint. Somewhere on that pad in between there is the best place to put the trigger. Preferred method is contact the trigger with the index finger. Careful not to touch the firearm anywhere else so that you don't disturb it as you're shooting. After you place the trigger finger on the trigger, you keep it there until you fire. When controlling the trigger, make sure the trigger finger goes straight back. Doesn't pull it to the side or push it over. What happens a lot of times is if somebody has a little bit too, they don't have enough finger on the trigger and they're barely holding it on the edge, as they're trying to pull back, they're actually pushing the gun over, because it's taken a lot of effort to pull that trigger back with just a little bit of your finger. So you have a tendency as you're trying to pull it back that you're actually pushing the gun over. The opposite of that is if you got too much trigger finger in there and you're trying to pull it back, you have a tendency to pull the gun the opposite way. So you want to find that happy medium, basically about right here in the middle of that pad, and you're pulling the trigger straight back, straight back, straight back. So when controlling the trigger, make sure you move the finger straight back. This will release the hammer or the striker and discharge the firearm. Control the trigger reset after the weapon discharges. So basically what's going to happen, just so everybody knows, clear and empty. You're going to fire the gun. So you're going to come up. I've got my finger properly placed on the trigger. I'm going to come up and I'm going to squeeze the trigger. And it's going to fire. If this was a live round, well, it would go through the wall, so we wouldn't do that in here anyway. But if this was a live round, it would fire, the weapon would cycle. I'm still holding onto the trigger. I'm still holding it back to the rear. So you can see I've still got control of it. I'm holding it back to the rear. Now for trigger reset, all I'm going to do is let it go forward until it resets. It's ready to fire right now. I don't have to let it go all the way back forward, and I don't take my finger off